All right, everybody. I'm here with Lieutenant Colonel retired Oak McCulloch. Welcome to the show, sir.
Hey, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for getting me a copy of the book. I ordered it off of Amazon. It's a beautiful book, by the way. I love that you did the hardback. I really like
Yeah, thank
that.
you.
I'm really hoping that when we release my book, I can have a hardback option, but I still don't know yet. But I really like the quality of yours. And I was like, oh, man, it made me so jealous.
Yeah, well, thank you.
So, let's talk a little bit about you. Born and raised in Tennessee, but then you moved to Illinois at an early age, I assume?
Yeah, so I was born in Tennessee, but I moved to Illinois, and I did basically kindergarten through 12th grade through high school in a small little farm town called Kirkland, Illinois. 1,200 people in the town. Everybody knew everybody. So I always tell people, when I would do something wrong, by the time I got home, my dad already knew. and uh, and so it was a good place to grow up. It really was. But I grew up there. I played baseball, basketball, football all through high school and middle school and summertime, whatever. And then I went off to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Did 2 years there. Did not graduate from there. I came home, helped my father with his business and some things, and then finished up in ROTC at Northern Illinois University, which is where I met my wife, who, by the way, yesterday was our 35th wedding anniversary. So
Congratulations.
thank you.
Wow, so that's pretty cool. So you went to West Point and then you left to come home, take care of the family business, help dad out.
Yep,
But it was kind of a blessing in
it
disguise
really was.
because, you went the ROTC route and met your wife.
That's right. And we knew each other for the 2 years that I was there in ROTC, and didn't date the entire time we were in ROTC. But right after she graduated, because she graduated about 6 months before I did, she then we went on our first date and got married. And like I said, 35 years later, here we are.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. Of course, you did 31 total years in the military, correct?
So I did 23 on active duty, and then if you count ROTC time and my National Guard time, because I was in the National Guard for a couple of years while I was in between West Point and ROTC. So yeah, I think I've done 40 total years of leadership stuff, but probably a total of about 30, 31 in the
Okay.
Army. But then if you count my time associated with the Army as like right now, I work for the Department of the Army as a government civilian, but I am working for the Army, so I still kind of consider that I'm still
Yeah.
in the Army. They just can't tell me where
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah, exactly. That's how I am. I technically work for the Air Force, but I'm working a job for the Space Force right now. And I've been working for, basically the DoD as a whole for the last, well, almost 17
Yeah,
years now.
absolutely.
So, 12 of that we're on active duty. And then the rest of it's been, as a government civilian. But yeah, you dedicated to the mission, kind of, whether you're in uniform or not. The only difference is I can't tell you where to go anymore.
That's right. They can't send me to Afghanistan or Iraq or some other country that I don't
Yeah.
want to go to.
And nobody tells you needs of the army or needs of the air force anymore.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, you can say no, you don't get to tell me that. So, I thought the most unique thing when I was kind of doing a little research was that you were an instructor for quite some time, and you did something with the Australian Command and Staff College. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So when I did my operations officer job, my S3 job, before I went to Command and General Staff College. That's kind of backward. Most people do their Command and General Staff College, then they go off and they're a battalion or brigade S3 or XO. I did all my stuff before. I did 2 years as a operations officer during my deployment, during my time in Germany and my deployment in Kosovo. So when I came back and I went through Command and General Staff College, it was during 9/11 happened while I was a student there. And they weren't going to send me back out to be an S3. They had a bunch of majors who still needed those jobs. So they kept me there at our staff college at Fort Leavenworth to be an instructor of tactics to kind of, since I'd already been in S3, kind of teach the group going out how to be S3s and XOs. So I was there for about 3 years teaching that. And then they selected me to go to Australia and be the foreign exchange officer instructor there at Australia at their command and staff college in Canberra. And so we went there for 2 years. My family and I went there for 2 years, and I kind of I was kind of unique in that I was the only, at least they told me, that I was the only exchange officer who ever got to be the head of one of their departments. They had like 3 or 4 different departments, and one of them
Hmm.
was division level operations. And so I ran that department of division level operations um, right off the bat. I mean, pretty quickly after I got there, they assigned me that position. And then my last year there, not only was I the head of that, but I was also the head of um, multinational operations. Um, so had the final course level, the end of course simulation that we ran, and I was the one that came up with the scenario and ran the day to day operation of that week long uh, end of course scenario simulation game.
Hmm. What was it like living in Australia?
It was kind of it's kind of strange because you're in the southern hemisphere, so Christmas is in July, and
Okay.
Christmas time, but our Christmas, summertime for us is their winter time. So it was kind of strange to get used to that. Um, but other than that, I mean, it was neat. It was a good experience. Not only did I get to meet a lot of great Australians, but because I was at the staff college there, I got to meet a bunch of other people. And I always tell people I had a group of people I hung around with, and there was a Canadian officer, there was an officer from New Zealand. There was a Canadian officer, a British officer, an Australian officer, and we all kind of just hung around there. The English speaking countries of the world, including there was one of the instructors there was from Rhodesia. Of course, it was used to be part of the Commonwealth, so they could
Okay.
be in the Australian Army, and they were, so we had all of the different dialects of English, and I always told people, you guys almost speak English, not quite, but almost.
Alright. You guys almost have it right. That's maybe the most American thing I've ever
Yeah, it is.
heard.
Yeah, well, it was funny because when I was stationed in Germany, my family and I we went to London and loved London. London's one of my favorite cities, or at least it used to be. I haven't been there since 2006, so I don't even know anymore. But I used to love to go to London, and I've been there a few times. And when my family and I went, we went to the Tower of London tour. So with beefeaters walking around talking, and I was a major then, even higher and tighter than I am now. And so it wasn't too hard to figure out I was an American officer. And so he was giving me all kinds of crap the entire tour, just taking shots at me. And I was taking it, no big deal. So at the end, we just kind of stuck around a little bit after so that my kids could we got pictures with him and talked to him a little bit. And I told him, he said, so why you come to, I told him when I was in Germany. He said, so why'd you pick London? And I said, because it's a great city. And I said, and you guys almost speak English. And he started to take offense to it. And I said, wait a minute, you can't give me crap the entire tour and then not let me take a shot at you at the end. I said, come on. He
Oh,
said, yeah,
yeah.
you're right.
Come on. Yeah, that was more than fair.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
yeah, it's always fun when the military sends you to the best places.
That's right.
Australia, London, Germany. I've never heard a lot of people complain about going to Germany or Italy. You
Yeah.
know, I mean, those are pretty good assignments. I've never known anybody that went to Australia though, so you're the first guy that I've known that was stationed in Australia. I've heard about it, but I never knew anybody
Yeah,
there, which is
it,
so
it, it
that's
was
really
it
cool.
was an interesting tour, no doubt about it. And we were lucky. My wife is one of those that plans out all kinds of great places to go and visit every time we get a station somewhere. Because I always tell, because my day job now I recruit for Army ROTC here at Embry Riddle. And I always tell the cadets because they always say, "Well, where should I be stationed?" I said, "Look, there's good and bad things about every place that you're going to be stationed. You can be miserable in
Yep.
Hawaii if you want to be, um,
Oh yeah.
so, you just got when you figure out where you're going, you just got to sit down and figure out all the neat things around there that you want to do, and you just got to get started on them as soon as you get there. Every chance you get, you just knock a couple of them off your list. And my wife was
Yep.
always pretty good about doing those kinds of things. So we got to see a lot of Australia during our 2 years there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I always told my troops, each assignment is what you make of it.
It
Now,
absolutely is.
some of them are a little harder to make,
Yeah.
things of.
Yeah,
I
when I
I'll
was
admit
stationed
that, but
at Fort Irwin out in the middle of the Death Valley, I mean, it gets a
yeah.
little harder. You got to go a little bit further to find some nice places, but we did. But yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. It is exactly what you make of it. Because again,
I
you can be
didn't.
I know people who are miserable in Hawaii. I don't know how, but they were.
Yeah. Yeah, I kind of I always said that, and at one point in time I was an instructor at a joint school at Fort Sam Houston, and I always told my enlisted guys, Air Force and Army, every assignment's what you make of it. And then was one of these soldiers came up to me and said, "Hey, what do you know about Fort Polk down in Louisiana?" And I said, "Well, okay. You remember what I used to say about it is what you make of it?" I said, "Hey, you better understand how hot and muggy it is down in Louisiana. It is just a whole nother level." And he was like, "Is it really bad?" I was like, "Every time I've been there,
Yeah,
it was so muggy." I was like, "You better save your pennies and find ways of getting out and doing stuff so you can ignore that heat, because it's not a Texas heat.
yeah.
It is just that muggy, humidity that is just crazy insane."
Well,
And
it's
he
out in the
was
middle
like,
of the swamp, so I mean, it's in swampland
"Yeah,
down
I
there. So
I felt bad for the guy because he was from like North Dakota,
yeah,
so it's
that's going
like
to be tough.
he was not going to understand." And I was like, how do I tell him without completely like ruining this and making him, you know, dread this assignment from the beginning?
Yeah,
But I was like, there's a lot of great food down there, Bourbon Street. I like, you're close to Texas and all this stuff. Like you can travel and do some fun stuff. But I was like, it's gonna be hot.
yeah, absolutely. But
I was,
you mentioned San Antonio. That's one of my favorite cities. My wife, of course, she was an Army nurse, so she went to her officer basic course at Fort Sam there in San Antonio, and beautiful city, love it.
yeah, it's changed a lot. Have you been to Fort Sam
No, I
Houston
haven't. I haven't been
recently?
there in probably 30 years, probably.
Oh, you won't recognize it now. I think when I left there, they were saying that joint base, San Antonio, with Fort Sam Houston, Lackland, Camp Bullis, Randolph, and Kelly, they said they're going to spend over $1 billion in infrastructure.
Yeah,
And they were repaving roads, they were residing buildings. I mean, they were doing it. It looked completely different from when I was there, from the time I left, and I was there about 4.5 years. So, they had some time, but between the hospital renovation and expansion and then all the stuff they did to the infrastructure, it was a completely new base. And at first, I remember talking to my Army peers, and they're like, "You Air Force guys are in here tearing the thing up, and you're making the base look different and all this stuff." And then they fixed this one intersection that was it was the worst intersection on base, and the Air Force came in and tore it up and fixed it. And it had turning lanes and stoplights and all this stuff. And then after that, my peers didn't say anything. I was like, "Hey, you guys aren't complaining anymore?" And they're like, "No, y'all fixed that road. You finally fixed that intersection." I was like, "Oh, you like that Air Force money now, don't you?"
yeah, exactly, exactly.
And we were giving them so much crap about that. When we finally put air conditioning in your gym, guys, and they were rolling. But it is a completely new installation now. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
really, really
hopefully someday
nice
I'll
and super
get back in
awesome.
that area.
Yeah, and San Antonio is growing like a weed
I
and
think all of Texas, just like
sandbox.
Florida, all of Texas and Florida are just exploding.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. San Antonio was huge, and um, I really liked it there. But you hopped around a lot, and eventually, University of Southern Alabama, where you were there in the ROTC program, right?
Yeah, so I ran the ROTC program there. I was the professor of military science there for 2 years, 3 years, there for 3 years, and loved it. I mean, my wife and I loved Mobile, Alabama. It was a great place to be stationed. Not a whole lot of Army guys around. There was Guard and Reserve people, but the only active duty people really were the ones that worked in our program. There was a big Coast Guard presence there. There was two Coast Guard bases, and kind of like the Navy, Pensacola is hub for aviation for the Navy. Mobile is
Hmm.
the hub for Coast Guard aviation. That's where they have their
Oh,
naval training center, their air training center there in Mobile.
okay.
Um, so a lot of Coast Guard personnel there in Mobile, Alabama.
So, a lot of success at that program because you tripled the size of the program before you left.
Yeah, so when I took over that program, I had 53 cadets in the program. And I, just like the military does, it sends you to a course every time they put you in a position. So you learn the things you got to know. And so they did. It's a 3-week course, and I couldn't tell you most of what they taught me there. But the thing I do remember is that the 2-star general, General Winfield, came in and he gave us a little talk, and he said, look, if you are taking over a program that is not making your mission, not producing the right number of lieutenants, which I was, we hadn't made mission in 7 years. He said, then you ought to lay awake at night thinking about ways to fix that program. And so I took that to heart. And so I went back to my
Hmm.
hotel room that night, took out a 3x5 card, which I still have on my desk. And I started figuring out how I was going to fix it. And the number one thing I put on there was the goal. Um, and I said, by the time I leave in 3 years, I want to have 150 cadets in the program, so triple the program. And then I started
Yeah.
writing down the ways I was going to do that. Number one was to take care of the cadets in the program, because if you don't take care of people, they leave. That's just the way it
Hmm.
is. And then
That
number
is the
two
truth.
was every day make every one of my cadets want to be like me. So set the example for them. Show them what an officer looks like, how they act, how they talk, how they walk, how they dress, how they interact with people. And if you do, and then I had a bunch of other things, but those were the three big things: the goal and the two big things that I had to do. And by the time I left in 3 years, the program had 179 cadets in the program.
Wow. Wow. That's amazing. And then, of course, now you're down. You eventually did go to Stetson University in
Yeah,
Florida.
Stetson, which is
Um,
23 miles away, so our program now, the ROTC program that I do the recruiting for the active duty lieutenant colonel, um, it has four schools in it. It has Stetson University, Embry Riddle, which is the host school. Then it has Stetson University, Bethune-Cookman University, the historically black college here in Daytona, and Daytona State College. So I always tell people, you don't get any more diverse than the program we have. We have an engineering school, Embry Riddle. We have a
yep.
liberal arts college, Stetson. We have a historically black college, Daytona, Bethune-Cookman, and then we have a community college, what we now call state colleges. But when we were younger, they called them junior colleges and community colleges.
Hmm.
And so that's as diverse as you get. You don't get any more diverse than that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a lot of people. And in 2019, you had done such a good job there that you were the top recruiting officer in the country
In Cadet Command, that's right. So there's
in Cadet Command.
274 recruiters in Cadet Command. So there's 274 host schools like Embry Riddle. And Cadet Command they selected me as the number one recruiter in Cadet Command in 2019.
So you guys were just crushing it.
Yeah, well, we went from, again, when I got to Stetson, there were 15 cadets in the program at Stetson.
Mm.
Last year, 2 years ago, we started with 106 cadets in the program um, at Stetson, a partner school. And when I took over as the recruiter for the entire program, we had 165 cadets in the program. We started last year with 388 cadets in the program.
It's pretty good.
Yeah,
That's really good, especially well. And I guess in that area of the world, I'm sure there's plenty of people to choose from. But then again, you got to recruit them, get them to come in, do ROTC, buy into all
that's
that,
right.
and of course they owe. If the Army pays for their school, they owe service time
Yep,
after that,
absolutely. I tell
and
everybody that walks into my office, I said, if anybody ever tells you anything in the military is free, they're lying to you. There is nothing free.
yeah, that is
But
true.
the
That
thing
is
that
true.
all three of my major schools, Embry Riddle, Bethune Cookman, Stetson, they're all national draws. So I get people coming in from all over the United States. I have cadets in this program from just about every state in the union. Um, the hard part for me is not, because it's tough to get people to come to Daytona Beach, Florida. I know. It's really rough here. But the thing
Right.
that I deal with is that the quality of young men and women that we get into this program here are the same quality of people who get accepted to Johns Hopkins, to MIT, to Purdue, to Georgia Tech, to University of Notre Dame, Northwestern, Stanford. So I got to convince them that this is the right fit for them, um, as opposed to some of those other um, big name schools that actually have a bigger name than Embry Riddle. So that's the hard part for me. But we've been pretty
Yeah.
successful so far because
Well,
I
sounds
think
like it.
we run a pretty good program here.
Well, and convincing them to not only not go to Johns Hopkins or Stanford or Notre Dame, but to come down to the Florida area, which again is probably not that difficult. But you know, wear a uniform, kind of walk a different lifestyle,
That's right.
have it a lot more structured and rigored and people telling you where to go. And then, oh, by the way, you're going to do that while we give you your education, and then you're going to do it some more to pay us back.
That's right.
You know, that's a that's a big ask for a young
It is
person,
for a 17,
uh,
18-year-old young man or a young woman. Absolutely, it is.
especially when they're staring at a acceptance letter from Stanford or Notre Dame or one of the others that you said, or even a service academy,
Yeah,
um, which is a lot a lot like the ROTC program. Only you're actually on the military installation the whole time, but that's still a competition. You still that's competition, and to be named the top recruiter out of 274, given the competition you're up against, I think is a huge achievement, and I think that's really really awesome. And
thank you. And but I
what
tell
was
people
it?
that I didn't do it all myself. I mean,
Yeah.
I got help from the universities who were giving me some incentives to help bring people in, and then we had some great instructors and some great professors of military science who understood that it was about the cadets, it wasn't about them. And so we built the culture of this organization. I helped, but all of us built this culture that was very enticing for young men and
hmm
women that wanted to come and be a part of the program.
I think that's a big thing because and in my book that I'm publishing soon, I wrote about culture heavily because culture is so important. you
Oh,
know
it's huge.
Culture can change people's perception. It can change their reactions. It can change a lot of things because they understand where they are and how they fit in and what's going on around them. If you have a sour culture, the smallest little thing can get somebody to leave. Even if it's petty,
Yeah,
it's something silly. It's something you wouldn't normally give the time of day if you enjoyed your job or enjoyed your workplace. Culture is such a big deal. So when you say you created an enticing culture, well, obviously that's why you're one of the top dogs because when the culture looks good, and that's what major college athletics is focusing on right now is the culture. Everything
absolutely it
looks
is.
shiny and bright and it's fun, it's happening. You look like they roll out the red carpet for you, and it looks and appears a certain way. So, you know, and I always kind of reference back to the University of Oklahoma and Oklahoma State University where I'm from. Oklahoma's not a big state, but they consistently get pretty good recruits in because they've created cultures at both schools,
That's right.
and it's a lot easier to convince somebody to move from Florida to Oklahoma when you have a culture and you have the swag and all the Nike support and all the things that these guys are looking for when they go to pick a school to play for.
Yeah, well,
You
again,
really
I
got to have
think
that.
that the two things that leaders are, in my opinion, the two top things that they're responsible for. Number one is a vision. You got to have a vision for where you want that organization to go. And
hmm
a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, however far out you want to go, but you got to have that vision. And you got to be able to communicate that to the people in the organization so they know what their part of that vision is, how they're going to help get that organization from here today to where we want to be, however far down the line. And then the second thing that leaders are responsible for is the culture. And You have to develop that culture, and it isn't. I was talking about this, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and I kind of made a mistake. I said culture doesn't just happen, and I said, well, no, let me fix that. Culture does just happen, not the culture you want, but culture will
Yeah.
happen if you just let it
Yes,
happen.
sir.
But if you
Yep.
want a specific culture, then you must invest time, resources, people, training, money to make that happen. And oh, by the way, you can't just do it once and forget it and expect it to feed on itself, because you're going to have new people coming in and people leaving. And so you're going to have refresher training and refresher stuff. So it is a constant battle to keep that culture where you want it to be.
Well, yeah, and not only that, but to your point, you know, granted, pandemics don't happen, all the time, so we don't ever have to deal with them. But the big thing that leaders and managers are going to be dealing with now is as we're coming out of a pandemic and things are kind of, you know, shifting now to where cases are rising. We're having a hard time getting people back to work, but some places are going back to work because now you have a very brittle culture
Right.
because are we staying here today? Are we going home? Like half of my coworkers are at home still because that's the new normal
Right.
is this remote working, teleworking thing. And now culture is even tougher because you
Yeah.
can't
But it's
stare
also
everybody in the
more, even
face.
more important.
Yes, sir.
And I think that a couple things that leaders need to do in this environment of the Zoom and Teams and all those virtual meeting type stuff is, number one, you have to have a bunch of meetings. You have to have, I think you got to have more meetings than you normally had, because you got to bring those people together and make them still understand that they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and it isn't just them
Hmm.
sitting in their office at home. They're a part of the organization. And number two, just like we're sitting here seeing each other, you got to make them put their camera on. When I'm in a Zoom meeting and I'm sitting there and I'm the only one that's got the camera on and everybody else has got a picture, I'm like, how do you know what they're doing? How do you know if they're engaged? How do you know? I mean, that's the kind of things that, if you're in person, you know those things. You can look them in the eye and you can see, yeah, that person's engaged. But if you don't make them put the camera on, if you don't make them part of the meeting by
Yep.
engaging them and making them engage, then you're wasting your time. Um,
Yeah.
but I do think that you got to make an effort to include people in more things, and when it's remote, because otherwise they just get the blinders on that it's just me here doing my thing, and it's not, or at least it shouldn't be. And if you let the culture uh, evolve into that, then you're in trouble, and you're certainly going to be in trouble um, when if we do get back to work. If we do, then you're going to have to start almost all over, building that culture again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely difficult. So you've been also publicly speaking for quite some time now. Started with high schools, that's kind of evolved since then. Um, how has speaking changed in the last 15 years up to the pandemic? Well, we won't include a pandemic yet.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things. I think number one, it's getting harder and harder to keep people's attention during a presentation, uh, during your speech or your talk or whatever you want to call it. And I think a couple things that I've learned over those years is, number one, you got to engage the audience. You know, I do not stand behind a podium. I walk and I talk and I get right up near people and I get them involved in my presentation. Ask them certain questions. How many people here have ever been micromanaged? And somebody raises their hand, then I might go ask them, "Well, give me an example. What happened then? How did it make you feel?" So I get them
Hmm.
involved, so they're not just sitting there bored, with somebody talking to them and not engaging them. And so I think that's huge. And then I think you gotta really think about how you use, like I use a slideshow for most of my presentations, not all of them, but for most of them. And I think you got to really take a good look at your slideshows to make sure that they are engaging and going to get people interested in what you're saying. But then the other part of it is you got to put it in. small bites for them. Put out some big information that is important, and then have a little bit of humor, have a little bit of involvement, so that you're not trying to keep them completely focused 100% um, the whole time, because you're not going to get there. It's not going to happen.
Hmm.
So you got to break
Yeah.
down those key things that you want to get into bite-sized elements, so that you can then let them relax a little bit with some humor, or getting them involved doing something physically or something like that, so that they're not just sitting there trying to engage their mind all 1 45 minutes to an hour of what you're talking.
Yeah, I think for me, I've given a couple speeches, and my biggest one was probably in Colorado Springs. And I always tried to lean in on, you know, what is the audience doing? Because me, as an audience member, the reason why I did so poorly in school is because I can't sit there for 45 minutes to an hour and listen to someone talk.
Yeah.
I will start drifting off, dozing off in the first 10 minutes. I'm just not very good at sitting still and doing that. I don't learn like that.
Yeah.
I don't I need to be engaged. So I always tried to engage the audience, and I always tried to let the time frame go as it went, you know. And if a 20-minute speech turned into 45 minutes because the audience was engaging,
Good.
there was lots of questions, we rolled with it. If it only took 20 minutes and then you had to pull teeth to get questions out of them, then it is what it is.
Yeah.
But, you got to kind of let the audience dictate it, because, if you try to do, and I've told several other people this, if you try to stick to the same script every single time, you're going to fall flat on your face, because
Every
it
audience is
just won't
different.
happen. Exactly. Every audience is different. And now we're in the pandemic. Now we're doing things remotely like we are right now. What has speaking been like now that
Yeah.
you have to log in order to do it most of the time?
Yeah, so I've been doing some virtual stuff, both in my recruiting job, which in my recruiting job is public speaking as well. I mean, I'm trying to convince young men and women to come to our university and our program. So it is a lot of that as well. But then also just for my leadership presentations, and that I told somebody the other day, the strangest one I've done so far is I did a leadership presentation for a university, a Catholic university in El Salvador. And so most of the people there in El Salvador at the university, they assured me that 90% of them could speak English. But because of the rules of the university, anybody who presented there had to have either had to present in Spanish, or they had to have an interpreter. So the first time I had done my presentation by a Zoom, the first time I had done it with an interpreter, and it was an eye opener. It really was.
Hmm.
And what I figured out was two things. One, using an interpreter, you're only going to get through at best 50% of what you really want to get through in the amount of time that you got. Because, you got to, again, put it in bite sized elements. So you talk for a few minutes, then you let the interpreter go, and then you talk, and then the interpreter. And so that was an eye opener for sure. But then it was an eye opener in that only about half of the people, and of course you can't make them put their camera on. So only about half the people had the camera on. So you were looking at a bunch of pictures, and rather than people who. So I focused on, and this is a key point that I think is important. You focus on the people who have their camera on, so you can actually see that they're engaged, and hopefully they're watching you as well, seeing that you are engaged with them. And it can be just like I'm talking in face to face with that person, as long as they got their camera on and you can focus on some things. And again, I tried to do the same thing where I had asked people, okay, how many people have ever been micromanaged? And, I had a couple of them raise their hand, and then I had them give out an example, so that way they're involved in it as well, and it's not just me standing there talking.
Yeah, I think it's I've gone to a couple different courses, and I've been, at some presentations and stuff where, they had to do it virtually. It's definitely a challenge. I would not want to be doing it, full time during something like this, because it's just that interpersonal vibe goes away.
It does,
It just
and
goes
that's a huge
away.
part of, at least for me, that's a huge part of my delivery and getting my message out is that personal vibe that I develop with a lot of people in the audience. Not everybody. Again, there's people there that are there because they're being made to be there or whatever. You're not going to
Hmm.
connect to everybody in the audience every time, but I think I do a pretty good job of connecting with most
Yeah.
of them because I do get them involved in it. And I'm not standing behind a podium. I'm walking around talking to them and getting right up next to them and involving them in the presentation.
Yeah. And there's just something, so, I'm sure in your line of work, recruiting, there's something different about sitting in a room with someone and going, I like this guy. I think I would go to this university because I like this guy,
Right.
you know, um, that because you can get that moment of kind of, let's relax a little bit. Whereas over this, how do you set the tone and the mood over Zoom so you can kind of have those fun moments and chat, like, and kind of kid around and kind of get that going. So it's definitely a challenge, and it's not something that I envy a lot of leaders to try to figure it out. Because I really do think a lot of what we're doing now is the new normal. People working from home and these virtual meetings and stuff. It just seems to be kind of a new normal.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not sure how many. I just had this conversation the other day with somebody, and I'm just not sure how much of the old normal we're going back to. Because
yeah.
let's face it, it's cheaper to do something like this than to fly somebody and do a conference where you got to house people, you got to pay for transportation, you got to pay for food, you got to, so it's certainly easier to do it this way and just let them go to their own, eat dinner at their house and go to bed. And then the next morning we start the conference again. And so some of that is going to stick around. I have no doubt. I
Oh yeah.
still argue, and I will continue to argue, that there is a place and a time where you have to bring people together and they got to have that face-to-face camaraderie because that's a huge part of a culture is
Hmm.
am I really part of this organization or not? And that's really hard to convince somebody they are if they're not building that friendship and that camaraderie with the other people in the organization. And eventually you're going to have to bring those people together at least once a year or every other year or whatever. So I think we still got to do some of that, but I think you're going to see less and less of it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. My boss, he's a retired lieutenant colonel of the Air Force, and he's very pretty old school. And when this first, started kicking off and people were going home, he was like, "I just don't think, remote working is going to work. We're going to have problems. We're going to miss deadlines." About 6 months into it, he was like, "I cannot believe how well you guys are performing. Like, you're almost performing better than you were when we were in the
Right.
office." And he was like, I really think it has changed my mind on how I perceive, the capability of remote working. Do I think it's 100% what we're going to go to when this is all over? No, but he was like, I'm not against it. Like I was totally against it,
Yeah.
but he just kind of saw that. So I think some kind of
I
hybrid
agree, and I think that's what
is
we're going to
definitely
end
going to
up with is
work.
some kind of hybrid where we do still do some things in person because we have to help maintain that culture and that in the organization. But a lot of it where it makes sense and where we can save money, this is what we're going to do. I think, and I think that's fine. We'll figure it out. I mean, we'll make it work.
Yeah. So let's talk about your book. Your leadership legacy, becoming the leader you are meant to be. Fantastic picture on the front, by the way. I think it's a very bold. Um, I really like just the clean look of it. The colors are awesome. But what I want to ask you is, when did you decide, okay, it's time to write a book about this amongst all the other things you have going on?
Yeah.
And then you published it last year in the middle of the pandemic. you know, what were your thoughts behind getting a book started in the first place?
Yeah. So the whole premise of the book is based off of the leadership presentation that I've been given since 2006. And I've given that leadership presentation thousands of times, probably. And I could probably do it in my sleep. And if you ask my wife, she's probably heard it a couple times during my sleep. Um, but I really at this point in my life it is all my passion is to get out and spread my version of leadership, which is servant leadership, to as many young men and women as I can, because we got to change the thought process here of how leaders are picked and trained and what they're doing in this country right now in all professions at all level, politicians, businessmen, military, you name it. There's some bad people out there who don't understand what leadership is about, and it is not about them. And they
Mhm.
just don't understand that. So we got to change that.
Yep.
So I realized that if I wanted to reach as many people as I can, and I'm going around talking, a couple of years ago before the pandemic, I went to 36 high schools, talked to over 5,500 high school kids. And I go around to colleges and I talk to college students. So, but I realized that if I wanted to reach more people, I had to do two things. I had to write a book and I had to get out on the speaking engagement. And I realized you're not getting out on the speaking engagements if you don't have a book. Because, Jeff, if you don't have a book, you're obviously not an expert, right? Um,
Yeah.
I hate that word expert anyway, but nobody's going to hire you to come talk to them if you don't have a book, probably. So I put the book together, and I did it. Um, it's kind of interesting how it all came about. I've wanted to do it for a few years, and then my wife and I and her mom and a friend here in the building, that we live in a condo here in Florida. We went to our church, and they had a motivational speaker come, and he was talking about motivation, and he was also talking about the Catholic Church and reigniting people in the faith. But it was really a motivational speech, and a great guy who I've become pretty good friends with since then, Jonathan Fanning, great speaker, uh, way better than I am, and so he was talking, and at breaks I would go up and talk to him, and it's funny because that was on the 15th of February, 2000. I went home that night. I wrote out my table of contents. The next day, I started writing the book. So the 16th of February, I started writing the book. A year later, on the 12th of February, 2021, I published the book. So a little bit less than a year from the day I started to the day I published it. Now, one of the reasons is because it's all based on that leadership presentation. I added a few things because obviously you can put more things in than you can in just an hour long presentation. But it
Right.
was based on that. So that's why came pretty quickly. A lot of it just came flowing out of my head without me even thinking much about it.
I like how you have it set up with the quotes. That's something I did in my book. I felt quotes really and reinforced kind of the topics, especially when you have like Norman Schwarzkopf, the big names like that kind of
Yeah, well, one of the things I made sure
reinforce it.
was, and I've been a big fan of quotes. I've got probably a stack of papers about that big that just quotes, and so but I wanted to make sure that I just didn't put quotes in there just to put quotes in there. I wanted to make sure that the quote that I used in that section pertained to what we were talking about in the book. And I've had a
Yeah,
lot of
it
people
meant
who told me
something.
that I did very well at that. That I hit a home run on that one. That they
Oh
thought that
yeah.
it went really well together.
I agree, and I love the takeaways and reflections that you have there at the end, so that people can walk away with something. And that was a big part of when I wrote my book. And I wrote it probably 15 times because I changed it because I just never was happy with it because I wanted people to stop reading and then have
Think about it.
something to take away.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that was always my big thing was I'm not going to write this just so it's Jeff talking about leadership for 200 pages. I want people to take something away so that they feel fulfilled when they close the book and they close that chapter and say, okay, I'm going to stop reading for tonight. But they have something,
Right.
you know, and then it gives them a reason to go back and look at it again later. So I really like the reflections and the takeaways you have. A friend of mine did an introverted leader book, and he did something very, very similar, but he did kind of like a little something for introverts to take away, but he did like something for extroverts so that he wasn't like alienating extroverts, but he wasn't saying they're bad people. But he was saying, hey, introverts, this is you. Hey, extroverts, this is why they're them.
Right.
And this is how you mesh. And I was like, man, I like that because it just connected both worlds. And it made you realize, you're not that different. You're very similar in a way.
Right.
And I thought that was really cool because when I read a book, I want I want it to change me. I want it to move me. I want it to entertain me, And I think I like little things like reflections and takeaways,
Yeah, well,
stuff like
I've had a
that.
lot of people who have told me that the book for them was not a one time read and throw it on the shelf. That they actually use it like a workbook. And I
Yeah.
have a couple who have told me that they keep it on their desk and it's tabbed. They've shown it to me. They hold it up, and it's got tabs in it, and they open it, and it's
Hmm.
all highlighted and notes on it, and they took good advantage of the note page at the end of each chapter and wrote down some things. So they say they use it as a workbook, and that it is you come in handy several times where they ran into a situation at work that was similar to something that was in the book, and they went back and to see how what I said and how I dealt with it, and then that helped them come up with their plan. Not the exact same plan I had, not the exact same thing I did, but it helped them develop the plan of action that they wanted to do, the course of action that they wanted.
And it's not a super long book, a little over 150 pages, but it's really impactful, and I like that in a book. To me, the length doesn't matter to me as long as it excuse me, you can kind of move through it. And another book, I don't know if you've heard of it or not, but I Have the Watch by John Rennie.
I
Um,
have not read that one.
Oh, it's a good
Okay.
one. He was a naval officer, something to do with submarines. I can't remember exactly, but he wrote a book called "I Have the Watch," and it was like 100 pages, and it just moves,
Yeah.
and it's about leadership, and it just you fly right through it, but you don't move through it to a point where you're like, oh, that was boring, but it's just like every single page, it's like, hey, boom, 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 and it's just super impactful. I think I read it 3 or 4 times just because I just couldn't get enough of
Right.
it. And I like that in a book. I don't like a big, fluffy, long 300, 400 page book where
No,
you're kind of repeating yourself.
and I purposely did not want to make 183 pages. That's with pictures and everything else, and so I wanted to purposely I wanted to make it to where you could sit down and read it cover to cover in one sitting if you really had to. And I've had people who said they've done that. Um, so I mean, it's not that hard to read. It's not that difficult.
No, it's a great length. It's really impactful. I've read a little bit of it, especially chapter 2 is what really got me. And where you begin, you see, understanding the concepts of what it takes to be a leader is not that difficult. Actually, doing the things required of leaders day in and day out is another
That's right.
story.
That's what
And I
the
was like,
hard part
oh,
is.
that is such truth,
Yeah.
because so many people think, oh, when you're in charge, it's easy to be in charge because you're the man, you're in charge. Man, it's so easy to say that. It's so much more difficult to live it and do a good job of
That's
it
right.
day in and day out.
That's right.
Whole nother story. And I was like, oh, that's such a perfect way to start a chapter. So you've been in with the government in the military for over 40 years now, almost 40 years
Right.
now. You're obviously bringing in, new guys to ROTC to join the ranks to be leaders. What has been like your biggest takeaway or your most impactful experience for you in your career so far?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that really strikes me is that if you do this leadership thing right, then you're making a difference in people's lives, and you become what I believe every leader must be. And I would argue, if you're not a mentor, that you're not a leader, because every leader should be a mentor. Because leaders produce more leaders; they don't produce followers. So to me, the most impactful thing to me was the impact that I obviously had on some young men and women who had a relationship with um, in as a commander or as a leader in their life, and that they continue to stay in touch with me. I still have people who call me up and say, "Hey, Colonel McCulloch, I'm now I just got promoted to captain, and now I'm moving to this base, and I'm getting this job, or I've decided to get out of the army, and I'm moving into the civilian world, and this is what I'm going to do." But they can just kind of keep you up to date of what they're doing, and then you got those ones that call, like I took advantage of a few people who were mentored to me and call and ask for advice. Hey, boss, this is what they're offering me. What do you think?
Yeah.
and then be honest with them and say, hey, yeah, that's good or that's not, and then but be there for them to answer questions for them and to let them bounce ideas off of you and those kinds of things. And that's been the biggest impact to me is and in the book I talk about a young man, when I was a company commander of a basic training company, an OSIT armor company. We were out on the range, and I got up on the tank one afternoon and had lunch with four privates that were sitting there. And I was eating the same MREs they were eating, and it was burning hot, in the middle of summer in Fort Knox, Kentucky. And I was talking to them and asking them questions and engaging them. And one of those young men contacted me 30 something years later and said, you know what, sir, because of you, when I got out after my enlistment, I went to ROTC, I got my commission, I did my 20 years in the Army. Now I'm on my time in the FBI and going to
Hmm.
have 20 years in that probably. And it was all because of the conversation we had on that tank. I mean, that's the kind
Hmm.
of impact that you can have on people and that you should have on people as a
Yeah.
leader. It is a privilege to lead people, and you ought to treat it that
Agreed.
way. And if you don't treat it that way, then you need to go do something else.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, I think a lot of my former students have contacted me and stayed in touch with me. Um, and a lot of them passed me up in rank. They're way past where I was when I, was medically retired. And they're all going to hit 20 and probably 20 plus. I know a couple of future, E9 chief master
Yeah.
sergeants for sure. Um, I got a couple that I know of still that are great officers and going to make even better officers. And I think that's a big part of leadership to me is leaving not necessarily a legacy for the next people, but lessons
Right.
so that they can evolve and be better than you. And it's just a constant paying it forward type of thing. And
Yeah. Well, that
I
goes
think
back
that's
to
awesome.
the quote in the book that I wish I could take credit for, but I can't. Master Sergeant David Powell is the one who deserves all the credit for it. And he's probably one of the best leaders I ever worked with in my life. Um, and I've worked with some great leaders, and I would put him right up there with them. And that one day when we were just sitting there talking about what we were doing, and he said, sir, great leadership handed down from generation to generation is what develops great nations. And I thought, wow, what a great quote. But you know what the really great thing about that is, Jeff, is that you can take that word nations at the very end, and you can take that out of there and you can substitute it with anything you want: a company,
Hmm.
an organization, a university, a hospital, a food bank, a sports team, whatever. And it doesn't change the context of that quote. Because I don't care
Absolutely.
what organization you are a part of, leadership plays such a huge part in whether or not it's going to be a successful organization or not. And I always tell people, if you show me an organization that has great leadership, I'll show you a successful organization. You show me one that has poor leadership, I will show you an organization that is either failing or struggling very poorly.
Oh yeah, I agree 1000%. And I love that quote. And you're right, it does. You can take that word out and it absolutely does not change the context of it at all. It's so applicable across the board. And that's a massive quote. I tell you what,
It
and
is.
sometimes the best quotes are ones that are just kind of come out of thin air. They weren't planned or anything beforehand. It's just honest, genuine, thought. And that's so awesome.
The funny thing is, Jeff, I went back a few years ago back to Mobile, where Master Sergeant Powell still lives there. He's retired and he lives there in the area. And I met with him and another guy who worked for me there at the University of South Alabama, retired Lieutenant Colonel Tim Ray. And we had coffee one day in there, and I signed both of their books. And I asked him, I said, "Do you remember saying that to me?" And I didn't think he would. I didn't know if he would or not. And he said, "Absolutely, I remember that day that we were sitting there talking about the importance of what we were doing and how important it was to get this right." And the funny thing about that is that I still use that kind of thing today because I've already been a professor of military science. Both all my bosses here at Embry Riddle have kind of used me as a resource, which I'm very happy that they have decided to do that. But I always meet with incoming officers or incoming NCOs and kind of explain what I do as the recruiting officer and what their role, in my opinion, what their role is. And I always tell every single NCO that comes in, I said, let me put this very simply to you. You're going to get some downtime here, and that's great, but that is not why you are here. You are here to turn this young man or this young lady into the lieutenant, the platoon leader that you wanted when you were a platoon sergeant. If you don't
Yes.
do that, that is your fault, and I don't ever want to hear you gripe or complain about an officer ever again.
Mm. Yep. That's ownership.
Yep,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
That's
And I
absolutely
tell the
correct. And
officers the same thing. I said, you're just came out of company command. Your job is to train this young man or this young woman so that they're the lieutenant you wanted, the platoon leader, when you were a company commander. And if you don't do that, that's your fault.
absolutely. Ooh, ooh, absolutely. So what's next? What are you gonna up to next other than dominating the recruiting space in Florida?
Yeah, so my goal is to get out and talk to as many young men as I can, and I'm hoping I can do that. And I'm starting to. I had I had a day at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh where I got to had a couple days. In 2 days, I gave three different leadership presentations, and they were completely different. As you know, as we talked, the audiences are different. One of them was
Hmm.
to administrators, recruiters, and staff officers. And then later on in that day, I gave it to ROTC cadets, veterans on campus, honor students. And then later the next day, I gave it to, they were having an open house, and I gave it to 10 prospective students and their families. So all total, about 100 people during those 2 days and those three presentations. Then I'm going to be at the College of the Ozarks in April, giving one of the convocation speeches. I'm going to be at Doane University in Nebraska at the end of April, and I'm working a couple other places to go and talk. But I think, again, this is my passion. I really want to get out and talk to people, and so that's really where I'm trying to start to focus my efforts, is to get out there and talk to as many young men and women as I can.
So obviously you can find the book on Amazon. I'm sure a bunch of other book retailers as well. But do you have a website that they can go to find out
Yes.
more about these
Yeah,
events?
I do. So my website is www.ltcoak, O-A-K, McCulloch, MCCULLOCH.com. And on there, you can find a link to the book. My cell phone number is on there. My email address is on there. If you want a signed copy of the book, you send me an email, give me a call. We'll figure out the best way to make that happen for you. If you want me to come talk at one of your events, and there's a list on there of already things that I could talk about, but I can certainly talk about other things that aren't on that list probably too. But I'm a history major, so some of it's history. There's some personal things like my experience during the first Gulf War, during my experience as a peacekeeper in Kosovo. So there's a bunch of different things on there. How to be successful, the leadership legacy one is on there. So there's all kinds of things on there. If you want me to come talk, you just got to let me know, and I'm happy to do that.
Well, sir, it was an absolute pleasure to have you on today. I thank you for your wisdom and your knowledge. I think we could probably do this all evening, but I'll be respectful of your time.
I'm
You
always amazed at how
absolutely,
fast an hour goes by.
I know, right? Yeah. You absolutely have to go pick up Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCullough's book, Your Leadership Legacy, Becoming the Leader You Were Meant to Be. Sir, it was a pleasure. I thank you for your time so much. Thank you for coming on, and I wish you the
Thank
best.
you, Jeff. I really appreciate you having me on the show.